All right. I'm so happy to welcome to the program here today. We have a new guest. We have Elodie with us, and I'm going to say her last name just because I've been taking French, honestly, for like 20 years and I can barely speak it, but I enjoy it. So Elodie St-Onge-Aubut. I'm just gonna go with it.
Thanks for
I
having
like it.
me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the program. You've kind of come across my feed a few times. I'm like, I would like to talk to Elodie. And then I reached out actually to Nicholas,
Nicholas, he
who was
told me,
on,
yeah.
yeah, who was on the program last. And I was like, oh, do you have any guest suggestions? I trust your judgment. And it was funny, he suggested you, and I had literally 2 days before you had posted something online. I was like, we should ask Elodie on the program.
Awesome.
Paused on it,
Maybe,
and then he confirmed it, and I was like,
yeah,
okay, here she comes.
the signals were on. That's awesome.
That's right. And I mean, this is a big program, Scorpio Eclipse season 2022. We're going to have lots to talk about
Ooh.
here. So, and Elodie's got the Scorpio flavor like I do as well. So I think we'll be able to impart some of our Scorpio wisdom, or should we say, learned experience on the program here today. But before we get started, Elodie, tell a little bit about yourself to the listeners.
Well, I'm a French Canadian, I guess. So English is not my first language, but I learned English 20 years ago. I am a practicing astrologer in Newfoundland, but obviously practicing online everywhere for, I don't know, 8 years now. I write horoscopes for astrograph, time passage, and yeah, I consult. I do research on the lunar mansion for the last 3 years. Lunar,
Mm.
yeah, and yeah,
Good. So she's out there. She's doing all
I'm
things
out there.
astro
Yeah,
in the in your off-grid palace out in the.
that's right. Yeah,
Oh, that sounds so nice. I would love. I have dreams of going to live in the forest. I don't know.
I think people idolize it a lot. We're social creature. I'm just gonna say, like in I spent my 20s really isolated, no running water, no electricity, and then moved closer to the city, but still off grid, but solar panel and all that. And I'm gonna say, in my 20s, I really miss social connection. I was not aware of that. So we idolize peace, quiet, solitude, and all this, but I do think that fundamentally we need social connection. And that was a big realization for me in my 20s because I had idolized the hermit lifestyle, but I suffered a lot from lacking like just the, connections.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we live to connect, and then like
Yeah.
even if you think you don't need that,
We need that.
we need it. It's like
Yeah.
we're just a social species. And so my ideal, and like as I keep talking about my house search, I'm like, I'm on the search to relocate. And my ideal is I want to be out in some nature, maybe on like a half-acre land. Doesn't have to be anything crazy, just enough to have some space, have some trees, have some green. I'm saying out loud because I'm trying to like,
Yep.
manifest it right now. But I
Absolutely.
want to be like 20 to 30 minutes away from a city, like
Exactly. That's
because I
ideal.
need that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel
And
you.
also, like, just people say, like, oh, become self-sufficient and stuff. You can't really do it just two people. You need a community to be
Mm,
self-sufficient, because if you're going to go grow veggies, let's say like harvest like sap or whatever, make wine, all of these things, two people cannot do that. Like, you need a whole community to do all of that.
yeah. I've definitely had dreams of the commune.
Yeah.
I feel like I would like to live on a commune for like half of the month.
5 minutes.
And then off it, yeah, 5 minutes. I'm done with you people.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's it does have this like kind of nice. I've always considered myself a little hippie-ish, so I kind of like that idea, but I know that if I was in it, I'd be like, no,
Well, we
no.
live in such an individualist society,
True.
everybody just drives their car alone, everybody's in their little apartment alone. We're just like online, we're socializing online and stuff, but we're truly very, I don't know that we're willing to give a little bit more of our time and stuff. Like, a lot of my single friends are like, I don't want to share my time. I don't want a relationship. Like, I don't want to compromise. Like, it's harder now to compromise. We're very
Oh,
individualistic.
You gotta learn that lesson though. I mean, life is all about compromises. Even if you're compromising with another person, you're compromising with an authority, you're compromising with just destiny.
Yeah,
Like
true.
life
Yeah.
is a compromise. And if you don't compromise, then you make things a whole lot harder for yourself. I mean, there's sometimes you shouldn't compromise. Depends on your personality. Some people over compromise and then they like, lose sight of themselves or, don't get what they really need or want. But for the most part, I guess it's just a balance, right? These are all the Venusian, Libran things we're talking about here.
Yeah. Also boundaries. I think that's also
Mm,
very Capricornian or Saturnian. But everybody I know, I think, just kind of, it's a little dance. It's an organic process to understand like how much to give or how much not to give. There's never like
yeah.
the secret solution, you know?
Yeah, I feel like it's a constant learning process and your boundaries change over time too. So
Yeah.
it's just like, checking in with yourself. That's why I feel like the whole idea of like values and boundaries go hand in hand. And why I've always like boundaries are very Saturnian, Capricornian, but I also think of them as very Scorpionic too, just because or like kind of like a pairing of the two, just because, yeah, you have to like you draw the line because you know what is important to you or what you need. And so, yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean that
Energetic output, I think, like a Scorpio word, so like how much energy is this gonna take and cost?
mm, true, true.
Yeah.
And so all these things that we're talking about here may come up as we go through the Scorpio eclipse season coming up here, because it is going to be a doozy. There
A
is a
spicy,
It is
spicy.
spicy. It is spicy. Scorpio is always spicy. And I think we were chatting before we got on here about I guess we're kind of the blessing of being having worked with the scorpionic energy and we both have Uranus near the ascendant. And so we're kind of like already, just in tune with the energy that's coming and how that could be just even though we had to live with it our whole entire lives, I guess we've been training for this moment, Elodie.
Yeah, there's something, yeah, once we get further down into delineating the month and stuff, there's I think that there's always a silver lining in the process of eclipses and everything. So I'm careful saying like, because you look at Scorpio and you look at Mars retrograde, like everything coming up and the Uranus signature, it's very like, oh my God, it's like everything that you could imagine that is so intense kind of happening at the same time. But I do think there's like a longer story, and there's something about Scorpio, being Scorpio rising myself, that I noticed with these eclipse cycle about just being more open and receptive. And I don't know, it obviously depends really much where your chart Scorpio is in your
Mm.
chart, but there's something about the South Node that's very spiritualizing and very it's not all catharsis and like burn it all to the ground, I don't think.
Well, definitely having it rolling through my first house, I've definitely learned a lot about myself.
Yeah.
And in relation to other people, that is for sure.
Yeah.
So it is, it's a learning process and you gotta be open to it. Gotta roll with those, roll with those punches.
Flexibility.
I know, which is not always a natural thing for us fixed signs here. But we're trying, we're doing our best.
Well,
Um,
I've read before, I think it's probably in Austin Coppock's book, but when he describes like the middle decan of Scorpio being the most fixed place of all the zodiac, we're talking about fixed season and just like hyper fixity. So change when it does arrive is, whew,
it's a
it's
lot.
probably, yeah.
Yeah, I've been confronted with my fixedness um as of late in all types of things in my life, like and how it is not benefiting me.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say anyway. I'm saying at times it has benefited me, but now I feel like I'm at this point and the changes that I want to make and the person that I want to become, it is in the way. Like,
Hmm.
and so I'm just like chipping away at like these rooted
Patterns,
patterns
reflexes.
and
Yeah.
especially kind of like reactionary emotional content that, because we're talking about water here. And so there's that
and
kind of
defensiveness. I always say Scorpio because it's Mars rule, but instead of assertiveness, it's more defensiveness. So there's something very no, like when somebody presents an idea to me, my first reaction will be no, and then I'll warm up.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, but I do think that the South Node in Scorpio for the last year and a half kind of like really just, I've been working on being more receptive and open, and just also same thing, being very aware of my knee-jerk reflex and just being like, okay, just there's no danger, there's no danger. I can just kind of relax into the experience.
Yeah, I had it we're working on my front room, what I call my magic room, which was like my library, and my office should be in there, but it's still not in there. And I'm I want to rearrange it and get things out. Most importantly, I want to give things away. And my partner is like, he's like, I want to help you, but every time I do, you're so resistant. You're just so, and I can't help you. Like it's just like, no, can't do it this way, and That
could also be Uranus on the ascendant.
It's all those things at once.
The resistance is like, I find Uranian people who have strong Uranus signature, they'll just not. It's very, there's
it's hard to, it's very, which is funny because he's got Uranus in the first too, and he's resistant in his own way. But I was like, you know what? I want your help. So I'm going to relax. I'm going to relax.
I got to relax. I can absolutely. I'm with you there. I've had very, very parallel experiences.
Yeah. So that was recently. I think that was last weekend, and I had my moment where I was like, no, relax, just entertain it. Yeah. So I totally get you on that. So well, we are, this will air probably a couple, actually I'll probably air this a little early because I'm going on vacation before Scorpio season gets here. I know, I'm like, is it? But I'm like, destiny has brought me to this moment, so I guess maybe it is. But we're gonna kick off Scorpio season on Sunday, October 23rd, which is interesting because we're going to be coming right off of a Saturn stationing direct in a Sun Venus cazimi at 29 degrees Libra. So there's a lot going on right before we get into Scorpio season. We have, obviously we've kind of touched on the fact that it's fixed water. We're also switching to a focus to Mars, which we know Mars is doing some things. I don't know about you, Elodie, but this past Mars slowing down and squaring Neptune, oh my God, what is this?
What I've noticed the most, I guess, in client consults, in the last few days, I was very excited for the first half of October being so air. I was like, oh yes, it seems to be very like rational, detached, and then you move into the late part of October, Scorpio season eclipse, it gets really emo, But what I notice actually is that people are confused, scattered, and it's actually very complicated. So I do think there's something happening about on many different fronts, and it's going to be affecting you depending on your chart. It's almost impossible to synthesize what's happening right now into a few keywords because there's so many different things going on. And I do think that's kind of like the Mars Gemini square Neptune. It's kind of scattering, it's confusing, not sure, and Mars wants to kind of like organize things and get stuff done, and it seems like it's not straightforward already.
I know it is. It's a lot. It's like, and I mean, I deal with Mars and Gemini every day of my life because I was born with that placement, but it's already like juggling a lot, like all these things I want to do, all these, you get a little information and then you get curious and you're like, oh, I want to try that out. I want to try that out. And your energy just gets diffused. And so what I'm noticing in my own life and in client work and friends and family is that there's so many options on the table.
Yeah.
There's so much information coming that is like, oh, well, I want to learn that, or I want to know that, or I want to find out more about that. But I also have absolutely no energy, and I'm confused if I really want to even try that, or like I can't do all this. So which one do I choose now? Or you know what? It's overwhelming. So I'm just gonna lay on the couch and have anxiety about it.
Yeah, which is a very mutable kind of mode too. And we're talking about Mars being an immutable sign. I do find that being overwhelmed by everything that needs to be done and then doing nothing about it is very mutable.
Ugh,
It's
story of
a
my life.
um, personally, because I don't have that much mutable placement, and like I was saying, I do think the astrology is going to affect people very differently right now because there's so many soundtrack. Um, I've been kind of enjoying the mutable energy personally because I it just balances me out. There's more
Mm,
flexibility and stuff. But what I notice is people who have a lot of mutable signature are kind of freaking out more, or they're
yeah.
more feeling that Mars and Gemini and the square from Neptune and all that, just being like, oh my God, just like overwhelm.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. And like you said, I mean, Mars, we just want to do something with it.
Yeah.
You want to move on from it. You want to like conquer that and go to the next thing. But Mars is like, you know
Mm.
what? You're gonna
It's
sit
gonna
in this
take
for a little bit. How do
it's
you
gonna take a little while.
Yeah. So you really have to like in true like kind of Piscean Neptunian form, you really have to like just kind of give way and like let go into it and like accept it for what it is now and not try to like push against it or piece it apart or figure it out. Like
Or
it,
find one solution, fix
yeah.
all or something. I've been thinking a lot about the sort of duality of Gemini and the sign, and almost like this is true. So if I go left, this is true. And if I go right, this is also true. And then there's kind of like just paralysis because of that. You're just like, so it's a whole process. And I saw Aquarian for Artists. I think it's on Instagram. That's their handle. I'm not sure exactly, but they were saying basically there's just too many things going on right now. It's not really a good time to um try to understand everything that's happening. It's kind of just like we kind of have to just go with it. And I
Yeah.
really I really like that because like you said, there's a lot of potentiality. Jupiter and Aries is really, in terms of bigger context, we experienced lockdown and everything into status because of Saturn and Aquarius. And I don't know how it was on the west coast of America, but here it was really, everything just kind of like come to a halt. I mean, the world closed down, and then you open it up, and suddenly we just have this kind of potentiality coming back and blood flow, and we kind of want to just take it in and experience life and be less online and have workshops and have trips, and I see it's kind of like the influx of the floodgate open. So in terms of bigger context, I feel like this moment in time is also a bounce back from the ingress of Saturn and Aquarius and the status.
Yeah. I can totally see that, which adds even more to the overwhelm. Now I had no options before.
Yeah.
Now I have all these options. And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
it's like I swear every time I open my inbox, someone is either selling me a course, is trying to get me to watch a live lecture, or I mean, I'm already kind of in this world anyways, but because obviously what we do, etc. But it's like so many educational
Yeah.
opportunities are like it's
Boom.
insane how many
Yeah.
are being thrown at it. Like right now I'm like, just stop, I
Yeah.
can't. I've got a
Yeah.
pile of books I haven't even like looked at yet. Like I can't. And it's so funny because it's the nature of what's going on right now. People
Mhm.
are feeling drawn to like, oh, let me put my course out there. Let me do this. Like, but it's information overload. There is
It's
just too
yeah,
much.
it's a lot. And I do think again in the bigger context, we're kind of being initiated into Pluto in Aquarius, the
Yeah.
air period, being all interconnected with the internet, and the realization that there's a lot of lucrative opportunities, and then there's a lot of traps also, and the way we manage our time and experiences online. But a lot of it, I do think, like when I think of Mars and Gemini, it's to a certain extent a continuity of the eclipses that were happening in Gemini, where we just kind of all ended up online. And now we're all online trying to make money or making a living online, but also trying to manage our time and experience and make it the most sort of streamlined possible. And you want to go on Instagram or Facebook or wherever social media to post your thing, and then you get lost, and then you're like, oh my God, I just been scrolling for an hour. Why?
Why? I love, I mean, I feel like this is, I always talk about this with Gemini, just energy in general, like, and getting in touch with like more of the spiritual component of like Gemini and what it offers with the information, and what you're perceiving and taking in is the big why of everything. Why am I looking at this? Why am I saying this? Why am I interested in this? Like, it's like, there's a lot of like, this is a great time to ask yourself a lot of whys, and not try to push it. Just try to take it in more to understand, why. Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting season for that alone. Cause I mean, really, Mars is not, obviously we know during Scorpio season, Mars is going to station, retrograde. And it's going to make a second pass to Neptune on, I believe, November 19th, around that time.
Yeah.
So like, we literally are in it for this whole period. So just get used to it, ease into it, don't push it. Yeah, because it's a it's gonna be a learning experience. What else do we have going on?
There's
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, basically we can kind of look at the whole period that Mars is in Gemini, squaring Neptune, like until Sagittarius season, basically. I would say like it kind of colors the eclipse, eclipse in Scorpio, because Mars rules the first eclipse of the season while in a square with Neptune. But that's what I was gonna say. I do like that Mercury enters Scorpio a few days later, and it will be in mutual reception with Mars.
That's right.
And I really like that. I feel like there's something about that that's gonna work in our favor. But when I think about Scorpio and Gemini, I also think about secrets and information. So, and there's like this whole aspect that is a little bit tricky. Like, I know when I see people who have a lot of Gemini and Scorpio, I'm like,
what are you hiding? No,
yeah, what are you hiding?
People say that about me all the time. Like, I'd have friends and they'd be like, you're up to something, or you're like, you're being sneaky, Mel. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm like, I don't even know if I'm being sneaky, but they're like, perceive it. Just because I'm like the Scorpio Gemini, they're like, you're up to something. I'm like, am I? I don't know. I mean, I may be, I don't know.
Am I? It's a secret from myself.
Exactly.
But if we think about Mercury being information and going into the sign of Scorpio, which is, taboos or secrets, and it just, there's like a whole kind of hidden aspect to the end of October, the hidden information, confused information or confused intel, secret conversation, things like that. And I'm not necessarily saying like natal placement. Like, you seem very candid and very like sunny disposition. So I'm saying more just in a term like mundane sense. Like, if you put Mercury and Scorpio and Mars and Gemini together, like, what are they up to? They're certainly not like frolicking in a field of flowers. Or
they're
if they
strategizing like a night ninja that is gonna have like
that's the thing. Yeah, there's something about strategizing and stuff, but the square from Neptune to Mars is like, there's a lot of layers to the astrology right now. It's almost like there's a lot of opportunity for strategy and kind of like yeah, the whole intellectual interface and figuring information out and structuring all that. But the square from Neptune is throwing a curveball.
Yeah, definitely a big curveball. And you know what's interesting with it is, like, as you pointed out, you know, we're going to have this solar eclipse. We're going to get into Scorpio and we're going to have a solar eclipse right away.
Yeah.
A south node solar eclipse that's going to be ruled by Mars. But it got me thinking, and it's interesting when we're at this time of year in Libra season and Scorpio season, and then same when we are in Aries and then Taurus season, is that we get these back-to-back lunations that are ruled by the same planet. Like, we're coming off of an Aries full moon that had its own, you know, Mars ruled flavor to it, that was getting close to that square with Neptune there. And then we're going to have the Scorpio eclipse that's with it too. So we have these kind of, we're in this period in itself that is very Martian lunar ruled. So we've already got a taste of Mars in a different way, with the Aries full moon, that was on
the 11th.
The 11th, was it around then? It was like 10th or 11th, something.
Oh, the 9th. It was on the 9th.
Oh,
well, it was on the 9th here.
Yeah, it's on the 9th. A piece of paper was covering the 9th, and I'm like, where's the image of the full moon? There it is. On the 9th there. So not to say, I mean, obviously these are different houses where it's taking place, but there's still Mars themes going on. So
yeah,
just FYI with that. But then we're going to have obviously the total lunar eclipse in Taurus. That's going to be a conjunct Uranus, which is definitely big news. So we're going to talk about that. And then in between it, we got to think about how there's going to be fixed quarters. So it's just like this whole fixed cross is just like getting like I keep like thinking about the fixed cross, and all, especially when we're talking about the Saturn Uranus square, which is the tightest it's going to be for 2022 right now. It's like when these things get activated, it's almost like just a big like click in the wheel, like a rusty wheel that's like, you know, and it's a jolt. It's not like a smooth, to me it doesn't seem like a smooth, like, oh, we're progressing here. It's like, you know, like,
yeah, or not progressing. I find like just how personally I experienced it, just because I have all fixed planets on the square and Saturn Uranus, it has been more just like the desire to change and innovate and bring new things, new forms, and the inability to really do that quickly. But having to just kind of like step by step and go back and revise and organize and maybe reformat and but this kind of also restlessness for new forms and new experiences. And Jupiter in Aries is actually on the solstitial point. It's going to be at zero, zero Aries, which is, I think, pretty powerful. There's like and there was when the sun entered Libra, we had the cazimi, you know, and now we're going to have another cazimi on the lunar eclipse. There's all of these, like, it's almost like when you're an astrologer in this time period right now, I feel like it's almost like looking at a computer program and something is being reformatted at a big level, because we know we're transitioning into this air period. We're finishing Pluto and Capricorn era. Venus is going into the beam and she's starting a new cycle. There's all of this kind of reformatting, but it's also very invisible. And then Mars and Gemini is just like, but let's get on with it. Let's just like, come on, you know?
Exactly. Because I mean, Mars and Gemini is, I'm just going to say it, it's impatient. It is. It's true. It's like life cannot move quick enough. And because it can't move quick enough, things don't get done, or you get overwhelmed, or you get frazzled and have anxiety because it's not at this pace. And it's like, I feel like it's that on kind of steroids right now, to some extent. And I totally feel you on that fixed thing. I mean, I keep talking about like, oh, I'm trying to find a place to live and move to a new, and it's like everything in its power is like kind of against me within it. It's like, now we have the highest interest rates ever on buying a house, and in the, you know, we're in this crazy inflation. It's like, this dream that I've had for so long is just like, it keeps getting farther and farther away. And I know it's not like but it just requires patience and timing that isn't mine. And I
Yeah,
think
because you
that's,
have to stay alert. You still have to
yeah,
stay with your goal. You have to
exactly.
stay with it, but you know that's not really budging, but you have to keep like kind of energizing that timeline. That's what I've been saying a lot. I need to energize this timeline because I can't move into this timeline. So I'm just gonna energize it. Um,
Yeah. You don't want to
that's
give up
the
on it necessarily. You just got to realize that it's not, there's so many, like you said before, there's so many different components swirling around that it's like there's just a lot of things that are kind of out of our control.
yeah,
Just in
that too.
general, in the way that life is resituating itself in the fixed spheres, in like what you were just talking about, with all these kind of wrapping up of bigger cycles and entering in new cycles. There's just not as much malleability in what we want to mold ourselves. And so, I mean, we still have power within that, but there are these bigger forces at play that that are stopping things up.
Yeah, I think like the transition into the air period, the 200-year period that is upon us is also that we're used to doing things a certain way, and now we're learning to do things in a completely different way. So what used to work for us pre-2019, pre-lockdown, I would say, because I kind of like that's where it really transitioned. Um, the way we used to do things is just not the same anymore. We really got sucked into the online experience, and everybody's connecting on many different platforms. We have connection with people across the globe. The whole face of the whole landscape of work and income and all of this and financial realm, it's all in a state of flux. And so the same routes and pathways that are familiar to us, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
It's not going to work, and it's going to take a little bit of reorganization, staying with the goals, staying with your goals, but being really innovative and looking at things in a different way instead of trying to use the same old recipes that work in the earth period.
Yeah. I think of it like in terms of timeline, it's like we got BLD and ALD. It's like before lockdown, after
Yeah,
lockdown. It's like
exactly.
it's like the
Yeah.
change of the era. And it's just, yeah, it's a life that I knew existed, but now seems so far away.
Yeah.
Um
We've just completely transformed. And in that sense, I just wanted to mention that I think on a metaphysical level, what's happening to us intellectually, we're connecting with people, we're experiencing our connectivity between humans in a very different way. And I think that's actually really nice. Like telepathy, instance of telepathy, or, just like, oh, I dream about you. Oh, I was thinking about you. And all of these kind of faster connection happening, like synapses, which, Mars and Gemini square Neptune is not just all like scattering and self-deception and all of this. I do think there's something happening on our intellectual level where we can transgress the way we always think about things and energy. And I see a lot of the younger generation speaking of that, like jumping timeline or kind of like tweaking destiny or tweaking fate. And it's just the way you perceive your reality will shift depending on your own sort of microbiome, for example, or, what you ate. And all of this kind of awareness around consciousness is really
mm.
changing.
Which is interesting when we think about like, obviously that Mars Neptune is like Mercury Jupiter, like that's where the tension between these two planets of like the perception and the
Yeah.
bigger picture, or the belief, or or the biodome, within it's like the whole thing, the whole
And the
enchilada.
Yeah, and the advent of AI, which is going to be very real in the next decade too, I
Mm.
think. So using artificial intelligence to make everything go faster and do more things, so that's also good and bad. It's very like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if we haven't overwhelmed you enough, let us
Let us do
Let us bring you into our let's go by transit. So if you're going to be watching the video here, we're going to share our screen and step through the chart. And of course, we're going to spend a little bit of time on the whole eclipse zone. So I figured rather than talking about that in our kind of like pre-time here, we'll just bring it in because it happens so quickly. So basically the sun ingresses into Scorpio on October 23rd, in the middle of the night here on Pacific time. But, you know, right before the sun does, obviously, Venus, who just came off her cazimi conjunction there, moves in right before the sun. So we have this sun Venus side by side. Just it's going to be that way for a little bit. You know, there's it's just an interesting, well, okay, let me pick your brain about Venus in Scorpio, but also her cycle within, you know, becoming that evening star. And what do you think about that kind of transition?
Well, okay, so in terms of context, on October 19, the Sun and Venus will square Pluto in Capricorn, just before Venus cazimi with the Sun.
Mm-hmm.
We have on the 19th of October, Sun square Pluto, and then the next day Venus square Pluto. That in itself, I do think is kind of like, because when we talk about Venus, we talk about values, what we're attracted to, how we do relationship, on a mundane level, like financial realm, let's say, or, you know, it's almost like we're saying goodbye, you know, because we know Pluto is on the verge of entering Aquarius. It really signifies a new era. Whatever was in place since 2008 is about to we're about to enter a new chapter in that sense. Venus cazimi kind of ushers us, and then she gets renewed in the solar rays on the 22nd, and then she enters Scorpio. But just also in the bigger Venus cycle, it's going to be the first time that she does a conjunction in Libra, in the petals. So there's this whole new way, I think on a personal level, like if you want to think about it for yourself, there's a whole new way of doing relationship. Think about relationship, think about self-worth, what you value, what you're attracted to, that is really just on the verge of being completely purged. I think the process is already there, but symbolically, we see that with the square from Pluto, the cazimi, moving into the eclipse. That's kind of the rhythm.
She's got a hell of a lead up before she, you know, that eclipse there. And knowing that she's going to be the ruler of the lunar eclipse that's coming too. So yeah, I think it's wise to point that out, that she's, you know, when she gets into the heart of the sun, she's getting burnt off in some way, shape, or form. And you're absolutely right. It's at this new like Venus star point at the end of Libra here, and it takes with Venus's 8-year cycle, it takes some time for her to start to move into a new sign. So it's been some time since she's been in Libra there. So, and I mean, this will be like a decade long experience because she'll go back to Scorpio. And so there is this kind of, once again, this in-between point, just how we are experiencing, Jupiter and Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, and how that happened in 1980. And there's these long periods of like getting situated, with more air to come versus,
more air to come. Yeah.
More air to come.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I want to share this only just because I had like an insight with it last night, when I actually went to a lecture on the Venus star point at our local SDAS meeting. And it kind of dawned on me thinking about the 20th century, at least from the 20s, and how Venus has been 3 of her points that she's been making, in the conjunction with the sun, it has been in her debilitated form, either
Aries,
Scorpio,
Capricorn.
Aries, or Virgo. But it really got me thinking, because I'm like, obviously Venus meeting the sun in her own sign, and this is going to be a thing, throughout the 22nd, I'm really ahead of myself, the 21st century. it got me thinking because there's power in the debilitated placements in my opinion, but they just don't do what the planet would normally think they would do. And I was just thinking about all the progress that women have made in their fight for like independence and kind of stepping up for themselves and being, like raising their voices, being heard, having to, women have come a long way in our independent journey in the 20th century. And I was thinking, I wonder if those Venus star points kind of like helped push that. And now she's coming back into her more, that
Her
receptive kind of
home.
Libra, her home. And so
Yeah.
how do we balance that out? How do we bring the balance to many factions of social, political, intimate relating, and so I just had that kind of like download where I'm like, I
I
mean, I
like
think it
that.
helped
Yeah.
that to have her in a challenging position to advance us through, I don't want to say
Good. That's a
hardship,
very
but
good point.
challenge.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, yeah, because we use debilitated and fall and detriment in astrology, and we always think it's negative, but it's not. It's just a quality, and that's really hard to kind of all reinstate all the time. So that's a very good point. I like that.
Yeah, I just wanted to have her get her little say there.
I love
She
Venus
does
and
good.
Scorpio.
Yeah, she does good things, there. So, well, we're gonna get a lot of Venus and Scorpio. So, what are your thoughts on Venus and Scorpios just in general?
Well, in general, I mean,
Brr.
I
Can you even speak of her in her
I
depths?
think, well, yeah, it's a relational, but we're talking about like intimately relational, So all the Venus and Scorpio like people that I know, intimacy is something really, really important. So I do think that, when Venus move into Scorpio, we're moving into like more of the impact of intimacy as opposed to being like kind of more I do this for you, you do this for me, or active listening. Venus and Libra is kind of like, yeah, yeah, okay, cool, yeah. It's kind of just once we move into the Venus and Scorpio, it's more like things are taken more personally.
Mm.
I feel like there's a proximity that you just don't. Yeah, there's more proximity because she's in the ray of the sun this year. I don't know. It's been a little bit of an enigma for me because I'm like, okay, Venus is kind of disappearing. And she's being eclipsed with the sun and she's in the sunbeam. So do you think that the Venusian themes are going to be exaggerated? Perhaps.
Yeah. Or just I feel like they're going through great changes,
Yeah.
and just like a transformation of their own. Because, like, I mean, when I think about it with my own chart, like the Venus for me rules the seventh and the 12th, and my like personally, my partner is going through a lot of like interchanges with himself, trying to figure things out, and so you can look at what Venus rules in your actual chart and kind of look at those areas, and maybe you'll see where this metamorphosis is taking place. But within it, like back to the kind of secrets that you were talking about, or working through material of just things kind of like coming up to be processed or discussed too, because she is backed by that Mars and Gemini. So that getting to that point of intimacy maybe isn't necessarily in the bedroom, but it's in a conversational space where we have to get like real with
Yeah.
sharing dialogues with each other, or how we're thinking, or so it
It
has this airy element to it too, it seems, this year.
Yeah, true. There's something about the whole process that's happening in Scorpio that I really value. I think it's kind of just like purging the poison,
Mm,
purging whatever is not, because when we talk about Scorpio, we talk about transformation and rebirth and all of that. And when we talk about the South Node, we talk about purge and purgation process and a spiritualization process. So it's doubling up on that, and so
it's a lot.
it's almost like yeah, there's like the just like a and it's almost like alchemical. Obviously, there's just like transforming what is no longer viable, you know. And because it's Venus in this intimate Scorpio place, I think there's something about honesty and truth that is really scary. It's really scary. It's very vulnerable. So because of Mars and Gemini squaring Neptune, how I see it, it could go in many ways for people in personally, but it's almost like you could be completely denying things, or you could be completely kind of. Scorpio is a very unconscious sign. I'm sorry, but I find that Scorpio in general is a very psychological sign that understands everything, but when it comes to itself, it's very sublimated and the instinct is on. So it's very instinctual sign. So when you enter these water, there's a lot of things that happen and we don't know why they happen. And it's only in retrospect, we're like, oh, that's why I was doing this, or that's what, you know, it comes from the lower part of yourself. It's like a very visceral, very, you know, so we move from first half of October, kind of having all of these intellect kind of reasoning and things, and we can find reasons and all of that, but we move into this like super watery realm of everything that is sublimated and everything that is kind of processed at the gut level. And I'm not sure, you'll have to be really honest with yourself. There's something about honesty and truth versus like deception or something.
Yeah. No. Well, and that's the thing, is like Venus having a little bit of challenges here. Like maybe there are things that come out, or we say things, or we express things, and they're not quite the truth, even though we think they are. And then we have to go through that and like go through the process, realizing, oh, maybe I'm not seeing that right, or I'm not understanding this. And so it's almost like it doesn't come out like initially like, oh, we've worked through this and we're healing this. It's like, no, it gets a little messy. And then we have to kind of clean it up through kind of like what you're saying. It was like, whatever comes up from the bottom, it's going to take some time to maybe process that, to be like, ooh, maybe I wasn't quite looking at that right, or I'm now understanding myself or another person or a situation in a different light, but I had to kind of like not in order to get that awareness.
And we're talking about power. Like Scorpio is a Mars rule sign, so we're talking about power, personal power, versus where you're giving all your power away, or you know, reappropriating your power. But because the Mars is in Gemini and it's square Neptune, it's almost like a negotiation process. It's almost like, it's kind of like you have to negotiate with yourself or with somebody else or with a situation, and just be like, okay, what's empowering me, what's not. And it's, so there's this like visceral but also kind of more intellectual process going on, which is interesting to see the two modalities like that.
Yeah. And when I think, like, as you were speaking about it, it kind of dawned on me, you know, we're going to have Mars station retrograde, you know, on the 30th of October. And usually with most retrograde stations, we say this with Mercury all the time, but you know, like something leads up into it to take us back, you know? And so as Mars is the ruler of Venus and the sun and the south node there's a lot of lead up in this first, you know, week or so of Scorpio season, which includes the eclipse, which we're going to talk about here in a second, that Mars is going to take into it with its retrograde there. So once again, if it gets a little messy and things come out and we have to do processing, it's like, we have that period to do that. And we have to just kind of keep that concept in our mind when we're in the moment, because it's an interesting Gemini and Scorpio, like the idea of in the moment, like there's the intensity of the Scorpio, but there's also the, I guess I want to say like this, well, also the flippancy of like Gemini, where it's just like, blah, 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 you know, like, and sometimes I say things and I'm
do
like,
that again.
Blah, 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 you know.
I love that.
And you know, you say something that comes out and it's backed by, and it has Scorpio energy behind it, and then all of a sudden something totally changes and you're like, why did I say that? No, and you didn't even mean it that much, you know, or maybe you did, maybe you didn't know you meant it that much. And then all of a sudden something changes and you can't take it back. Um, all the Scorpios out there are
Yeah.
like, I know. But yeah, so it's like,
Yeah, it's a mixture of
be careful with
candid,
that.
a
Yeah.
mixture of like like really private and candid energy.
Together.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
And
like that.
so,
It's a very real contrast, and it's nerve-wracking to see in a sense, because you're like, "Oh, what is the Joker going to do?" You know, like Mars and Gemini, I'm sorry, but I see it as a Joker. It's not taking anything seriously, and Scorpio takes itself very,
very
very
seriously.
seriously. You know?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's funny. Well, it'll be funny in the moment, I suppose. Have a good sense of humor. Maybe that's what we're going in here. So, all right. Well, we start Scorpio season that way, basically, with the Sun and Venus riding next to each other, and Saturn freshly direct too, which is a whole, story in itself. I mean, that happened right before Scorpio season started, but now we have Saturn direct, we got Pluto direct. You know, there's Saturn direct's a big thing. That's big news in my mind. So there is a lot of just I don't want to, I mean, I have like a concept of it, but I don't have words for it right now.
It ties in the first half of the year, where I think we may have been trying to do things that were not quite possible, and there's going to be some triggers that might like accelerate things towards maybe more of the beginning of next year when Mars station direct. But like I do think that because Saturn stations direct, we have Jupiter going back to Pisces where it was in May. And that happens just a little bit after the eclipse on the 28th of October. But Jupiter returning in Pisces, personally, as an astrologer, when I saw Jupiter in Pisces at the beginning of the year, being conjunct Neptune on the eclipse in Taurus in May or end of April, was like, oh wow, that's like so juicy.
I know.
And it was really nothing. It was very slippery, and it was kind of like, it felt like a wet towel or something. I don't know, but I've just talked to a lot of people who there was kind of like a lot of hope, and then it kind of just didn't go anywhere. I do think that we're gonna see maybe some form of unfoldment of what was planted with that Jupiter in Pisces at the beginning of the year. There's really like kind of this linking up of the first half and now.
It's so interesting that you say that, because when we think about, because that back in that April 30th eclipse, we were all like, oh, look at that Venus, Jupiter, Neptune. But it makes a whole lot of sense. We have like inflated hope that literally like fizzles out, right? It's just it diffuses, or it just vanishes in thin air. It's like this was going to be all this, but was it?
Where did it go? What happened?
Yeah, where
the divine discontent.
Yeah. I do know. Well, because think about it, right? I know so well. But I feel like so many people are in that place. So you saying those two words really, in my mind, lead us to where we're going here, right? Because this was our last solar eclipse on April 30th of 2022. And we're, that set up this whole open door to this period that is leading us to this eclipse that we're about to talk about. And so the idea of divine discontent coming in, all the hope, right? And then all of a sudden it's deflated. And then we realize it was like, oh, but where am I? What spiritual progress am I making? Like inside, like feeling like there's more, or I need to change this, or what's my direction? Like I have this call, but my life isn't aligned with that. Can I do this? Working through doubts. Like it's all these kind of like divine discontents leading us here.
My life is not aligned to what I want is also a signature of Saturn square Uranus since last year. It's like this need to innovate. Uranus, this need to really pop yourself out of old stagnating circumstance, but not being able to do it that efficiently, or not being able to do it at all, and feeling like you're just kind of living in a dinosaur format, like an old format that's just an old script, like, but you're not able to. And I do think there was kind of like this hope a little bit. So imagine you're reading like a storybook, and you're like, you're all into your story, and you're just like, no, 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 no. And then, and then you don't know, like the story just kind of, you don't know where it happened. Like,
The
time for
pages
bed.
just go blank.
Time
You're like,
for,
turn
yeah,
the page, there's nothing
the
there.
page just
and you're
goes
like,
for blank. Yes, exactly. So there is something about when I see Jupiter returning to Pisces now, just as we're, we have all of this eclipse impulse, and we're finishing the year, and Jupiter in Pisces is going to rule Sagittarius season. Jupiter's entry into Pisces on the 28th is when the moon is in Sagittarius. There's kind of like the idea of like picking up a story that was being told like around the first half of the year that kind of just, yeah, like you said, fizzled out or something.
yeah.
Um,
Well, the story's
yeah,
back. I
the
feel like
story,
the
it might not necessarily be like the same story or the same thing, but it's almost like, you know, yeah, I don't know necessarily that it's like this clear cut, but there's something about the first half of the year and the end of the year that just links together.
well, I was kind of
with it.
looking at it like earlier in the year when I was thinking about Jupiter moving back in, because it only moves back in for a couple degrees in Pisces, right? It's not
Totally.
doing like a
Yeah.
crazy long tour. It's like we got a couple months to figure this out. And to me, it felt like going in and treading the potential of the new territory of what Jupiter and Aries brought, right? It's like this whole new start and what you could do and the initiating these beginnings and all, like this bigger picture of what could be in this longer cycle. But also either having to deal with like the emotional baggage that comes with that,
Yeah.
or B, like what hasn't been just cleared up in your life and is still messy and has to be like wrapped up and to even go to this
Yeah.
next journey horizon, to take the rocket ship to Jupiter and Aries. Like
Well
there's
said.
I feel like I felt like out the gate that there's just emotional baggage that needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just my life, I don't know. But
Yeah.
but I feel like a lot of us are feeling that right now. And so it's a very internalized and spiritualized process because we have all this water energy coming in, at least at this point
Yeah.
in the chart. So let's get into this eclipse here.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a lot to kind of go through, although we've been touching on a lot of components, but it's going to be on October 25th, 3:48 a.m. here Pacific. So it's rather early in the morning if you're in North America.
It's 6:48 on the East Coast.
Yes. So, you're gonna
AM.
wake up, you're gonna wake up eclipsed probably on Tuesday morning. You're gonna be like,
Well,
oh,
or having poop dreams, because everybody knows now that South Node eclipse brings poop dreams.
how does it now?
You didn't know?
Maybe poop, poop dreams maybe, or like classic dreams of having to pee, like maybe these are my
Pee in
classic
public.
dreams. Well, I have to go like pee or something, and then I get to the bathroom and maybe it's overflowing, or there's like all this toilet paper in the and there's pee all over the seat, and I'm like, my Saturn in Virgo's like, I can't sit on that, and so there, yeah.
But the reason I'm saying this is just because the South Node, this is an eclipse happening on the South Node, and the South Node sometimes is compared to an overflowing toilet. So,
Yes.
And when I studied with Austin, like in 2015, he mentioned poop dream, and then we were talking about it between us, and we just started realizing that actually that is a thing. It seems that people dream about poop during South Node eclipse, or even just eclipses, and also food poisoning. There's another side. Yeah. So the South Node and food poisoning sometimes.
Like literal food poisoning or dream food
Yeah.
poisoning? Literal food
Yeah.
poisoning.
Literal food poisoning, because the South Node is just this kind of like, you know, you're expelling.
Yeah.
It's like it's a point of saturation. Things need to be spiritualized, um,
Yeah.
out of your body.
Out of your body. I like to call it, I always deem the South Node the celestial Drano.
Yeah.
That, like it's clogged and you need to power down those chemicals or whatever it's going to put down your drain so that you can like flush it all out, because it'll just start to build up and start to like suffocate you or drown you in some way, if we're thinking about the water, until the clog is cleared and it's like out. So, and I also like, well, it's interesting too, because in this book, I'm gonna botch it if I don't grab it. The Dietrich Pisson, I think, maybe the lunar shadows, the predictive power of eclipses and the moon phase, the predictive
Nice.
power of moon phases and eclipses. I find it interesting what she was saying about the South Node cycles, just in general, about being kind of course I should have bookmarked the page there. She said at a South Node solar eclipse, the influence is still focused on beginnings, but from a seventh house perspective, it initiates issues with relationships and engages a mate, partner, roommate, or any other significant person in your affairs. The essence of this eclipse brings great importance to the new things you do with others or things that are old and familiar. Its impact is likely to leave you with an entirely new perspective based on powerful interactions with others. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
So where's the seventh house coming from? Like the seventh house interpretation of the...
I think she's thinking of it just because maybe the North Node is kind of like the self, or like the drawing of where the self is going, and the South Node being eclipsed is kind of like
Gotcha.
almost like an opposition type
Interesting.
aspect.
I never
Yeah, I
heard
thought
that
that was
kind of. Yeah.
me either. And I thought it was interesting because I started to think about it a little bit more, and I just kind of wanted to put it out there in the realm so people could track it and see if they do notice something like
That's
that.
cool. Do you know Bepin Behari? He's like a Vedic astrologer. He wrote Myth and Symbol of Vedic Astrology, and he goes into the delineation of Rahu and Ketu. And from a Vedic, I'm very interested in the nodes and the eclipses from a Vedic perspective, because they just have a richer tradition, because they use Rahu and Ketu, North Node and South Node, as shadow planets. So there's just a lot more literature on the topic. And the nice thing about K2 being a spiritualization place, a point of spiritualization, is that there's actually great knowledge to be acquired there, because fundamentally the material reality is a sort of world of illusion from from a spiritual perspective, or more like, East Asian perspective. It's like, in the North Node represent more of that kind of grasping, that illusory grasping, the samsara, or, coming into the material world. But to be in the material world is sort of to tell yourself a story, because fundamentally it's just all, So the South Node is actually revered and respected as like this great teacher that brings you important soul lessons. So you're not going to gain traction in the material world so much, but you're going to really it's a place of spiritual evolution, let's say. So this sort of, an eclipse on the South Node would be a purging, but a necessary purging to refine your being into, greater understanding of itself. So it's not like, if you see people being like, oh, great eclipse to manifest, it's actually the opposite. It's like great eclipse to understand the fundamental sort of truth and principle that guides your life, outside of gaining traction in the world. Like if you're focused on like getting rich and getting beautiful, that's not a good eclipse for it. But if you're looking to relinquish, let go, be more flexible, more open, or just have like a deeper spiritual practice or something, it's kind of like that, more of that energy. it's like, but it's very much like you can't get what you want, you know? It's like this is all just like not actually nourishing or sustaining like the material world. Like true sustainment or nourishment is not found in having a full bank account, although, you know, I don't know, we could debate
It
that a little
helps
bit,
a
but
little, you
but
know.
yeah, so south node, people are afraid of south node eclipse. I mean, eclipses are in Vedic tradition are perceived as more malefic also, you know, because they're just like such a energetic vortex.
Yeah, there are. But I mean,
Yeah.
I love what you're saying there because it makes a lot of sense. So if we kind of pull back to just the quick picture we were painting with the previous eclipse in April, and it kind of
Mhm.
introducing that divine discontent that we were not quite aware existed in our material
Yeah.
world. And then it's bringing us to this eclipse that is more of a spiritualization moment, where we have this period where we have to get less in touch with the material, not less in touch. We have to work with the material world, but isn't in
Yes.
service to the greater spiritual mission that we're on, which speaks to the Jupiter moving back into Pisces energy
Yeah.
too. So there is this, I love how you bring up there's this spiritualization process that we have to go through. Like we have to connect with what that mission is, connect with what fulfills us on like in our spiritual life and how that relates to the material world. Because like kind of in the back-to-back Mars energy that I was just talking about earlier in the program with, you know, the Aries full moon, and then we have this you know, Mars ruled eclipse that's happening. We're going to have back-to-back Mars eclipses from here on out, because the next eclipse is going to be at 29 degrees of Aries in the spring. And I mean, we talk about Jupiter going to be in Aries and this whole new story that's birthing. So once again, getting in touch with what this, you know, the spiritual motivation and what still needs to be wrapped up on an inner personal, you know, level, like it's prepping us in my mind for what that's going to be. Because of course Mars will finally leave Gemini, it'll have moved through that space, Jupiter will go through that space. So there's all this momentum to me that's coming in the spring and the, you know, like April and May and etc.
Mhm.
um but this eclipse is key in what we need to still process and go through and clear out and connect with before we get there, I guess.
And doing it with faith. I think like Jupiter
Mm,
represents faith, you know, and because we're talking about such like it's such like an immaterial moment, it's almost like um yeah, it's more about not getting what you want that gets you what you want or something like that. It's more about, you know, there's something about south node eclipses and just yeah, trusting the flow, trusting the process, trusting the experience, and relinquishing your personal agenda and just kind of um experiencing sort of the willingness to be transformed to what is happening to you, and not saying like just sit back and just don't do anything. That's not really what I'm saying, but usually like a south node eclipse like that, that's how I would see it. There's a sort of um yeah, just
yeah.
if you want,
So
like it's like trying to let's say, you know, trying to get ice cream, you're like lost in the desert and you want ice cream kind of thing. Like you're not going to get ice cream. It's kind of like a circumstance thing. It's like understand your circumstance and be patient with them, because you might be um you know, Neptune and Jupiter, they might be glimmering something, but it's like it's out of your current context. So don't get discouraged by your current context and don't get lost in that mirage that is
gosh,
being
yeah.
kind of shimmering. Just understand the process and the wisdom inherent in that experience, something like that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's it can be frustrating when you're not where you ideally want to be.
Yeah,
Um
you're just like, why am I still here? Why am this is still happening? And then Mars and Gemini is just kind of like itchy to get going, and then you know, There's the whole Uranian component of the two eclipses happening, in late October, 1st November. And so there's really this desire for new forms and being really impatient for the old stale formats.
Yeah. And I mean, even with like bringing just the tarot into it and thinking about this eclipse happening in the decan of the 5 of cups, I'm like, well, there's loss there. There's disappointment.
Yeah.
There's something that leaves, or, in order, but there's still stuff to work with there as well. So from a tarot perspective, it is a very challenging eclipse, especially with Mars and the 10 of Swords, which is also like a finality, and coming to the terms of the ending of something. So it's pretty right to say that a lot of people will go through some sort of ending that transfers them into what is to be, with the Aries eclipses that are coming and Jupiter going back into Aries. And so it's almost like make peace with that in your
that
life.
process. Yeah. And just to specify also that eclipses, like events that transpires from eclipses, do not necessarily transpire on the day of the eclipse. I think the range is like the next following 6 months. So you're right about the spring. That's about the timeline, for myself in my life and how I've been kind of conceptualizing the rhythm. I'm kind of just like sitting and going through this process, and I give myself until next spring to really understand where the pieces are going to fall. Just because these eclipses are impacting my personal chart, it's like, so there's something about just needing to be patient and kind of observe the process that needs to happen and letting go, like you said.
I'm on that same timeline, and honestly, I think the timeline is what saves me, because knowing the timeline, knowing that, I'm like, okay, well, let me give it to here. That helps calm the Mars and Gemini a little bit, right? Because I don't feel like there's this infinite of like, I don't know when
you're missing out. Like, you're missing out.
Like, at least I'm like, no, this is the time frame. Let's be patient within it. And have hope for what this might bring on the horizon when we get there. So if anybody else needs that hope, there it is. Set your
because you can also calendar. See, like, I do think that social media, and we're all connected to social media at a certain extent, mirrors this reality where you feel like everything can happen right now and everybody's doing these things, and if you don't do it now, then when? So it removes from the equation the natural process or time scale at which you do things. And I do find the younger generation, like I was saying, talking about manifestation and timeline jumping, or different things like that, where people are looking for to have these lives and these experiences that social media mirrors, which is not real at all. So you always have the impression that everybody's successful, beautiful, on vacation, healthy, exercising, and all of that. And when you try to apply that to your reality, like how like you can't do that. So there's something about, just I wanted to mention, because the Neptunian component, Neptune, ruling, just like like I would say social media to a certain extent, especially with the Mars and Gemini component. It's like the image that you're absorbing, they become really kind of real truth in your head, but and then like if you're basing your whole conception of reality on like, how many likes you have and stuff like that, like, because it's a reality we have to contend with now too.
Yeah, I think you're right on by saying that. And especially, I feel like Mars square Neptune is very, all that glitters is not gold type of thing, like, just because it looks like, and I mean, what's nice about this eclipse, I guess, is that, Mercury is trining Mars there. But Mercury's also about to square Pluto, because that's going to happen. That's the next aspects to happen on October 26th and 27th. So Mercury is going to be energized in many ways, and mirroring those Sun Venus moves that happened before they moved into Scorpio that you mentioned earlier. So there is, I think, that ramps up once again, kind of like, I mean, Mercury in Libra, and like, being being mentally aware of like what other people are doing or saying or being, and like how that is challenged to have to change within like the system or your own space, or what, like I feel like there are mental challenges within this particular eclipse
Mm-hmm.
energy too,
Yeah.
and the week in general, just
Mm.
because so Mercury is in an interesting spot supporting the Mars process, but also challenging the whole thing with the square to Pluto too.
Yeah, it's busy. And
It
again,
is
like I said,
busy.
it's busy. Like I said at the beginning, I think like it's not necessarily that we're be plugged into all and each aspect. It really depends what your rising sign is, where your natal planet is on a, personal level. I do think that like, because when you start looking at all of these delineation, I don't think that necessarily they play out all equally for everybody.
Everyone, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just even thinking about like, I mean, everybody's going to feel the eclipse, but when all these other planets have their agendas, like me, I'm going to be paying attention to that Mercury, because I'm in a Mercury time lord year. I am actually going to be driving a 10-hour drive on the day that Mercury is trining Mars and squaring Pluto. So hopefully that will help me out. Luckily the moon will be Sagittarius there. But I think it is it is a busy start to the eclipse
Eclipse. Yeah.
cycle on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday
Mm.
there, basically, which, I feel like around eclipses too, like, I mean, Mercury is the messenger, it brings some news. So, an eclipse happens and maybe some new information comes in, or you
Yeah.
process something in a different way, and there's just something that is like maybe testing or changing the mind, or giving some serious information to kind of just think about or process with that square to Pluto.
Mm.
um just
Yeah.
thoughts. But I do like that Sag moon after it, because it's like, whoo, just let me out of that space a little bit, or at least,
Yeah. Catharsis is not always easy.
no, it's is it ever easy? Maybe for some people. But all right, so right after that eclipse, we got, like I said, Mercury's going to trine Mars, it's going to square Pluto, and then on the 29th, I'll just follow Mercury's moves for a second here. It's going to move into Scorpio. So Mercury's going to join the Scorpio party around the 29th here, just in time for Mars to station retrograde, which is interesting, because you were talking about Mercury moving into Scorpio
Being in mutual
earlier.
reception,
Being a mutual reception.
which I like. So it's almost like, okay, like Mars stations retrograde in the sign of Mercury, and then Mercury enters Mars's sign. So these two, again, like this dialogue between the Scorpio and the Gemini places are on. Mutual reception, usually it's like they're helping each other, they're helping each other out. So I'm always looking for the silver lining, in these type of aspects, because you never really know how the aspects are going to manifest. Tense aspect, like you were saying, planets in detriment or fall often bring positive changes in the long run, or the important changes. The trines and the sextile, we tend to kind of lean back on it. It makes us lazy a little bit. So Mars stationing retrograde just as Mercury enters Scorpio, I think is good.
It's interesting because they're in like mutual reception, but they're also like, I feel like they don't directly help each other out, like, because they're not in aspect in one another. It's like they might help each other out, but in ways that are unforeseen. When Mercury does something, and then it goes to the Mars thing, and he didn't, they're not like in sync with one another, but just in general, they're doing things that are going to create some sort of symbiosis through both of what their agendas are.
I like, but nice
that
word,
aversion.
symbiosis.
So yeah, it's interesting. So, Mercury's going to join that party. We're going to have a whole lot of Scorpio going on, backed by that Gemini Mars, and Mars is going to retrograde under that Mercury, Scorpio energy, because Mercury does move in before Mars does its backwards about face. And to me, that makes it even more like talking about the introduction of something that's going to take you into the Mars retrograde, right? Because Mercury ruling Mars is going to go through the trine to Mars, the square to Pluto. It's going to move into Scorpio and basically conjunct the solar eclipse point, and then Mars goes retrograde. And it's like, okay, well, we did that now.
Yeah.
And all the while
it's gonna require patience.
it's going to require patience. We also have Jupiter on that's around the same time on the 27th, 28th, that is going to be moving back into Pisces. And we already kind of covered that a little bit, but just think about that, you know, when we're talking about coming off this eclipse and then the 27th through Halloween, basically, the 31st here, there's a lot of planetary energy at play. So just be conscious of it, be aware of it, work with it, have the patience within it. There's definitely trickster energy abound.
Totally. Yeah. Like I was saying too, I always like when delineating things like this, it's never necessarily, you know, on the day of that. It's Mars station retrograde or a planet stationing retrograde can be really obvious on the day of. But I do think it speaks of sort of like a longer process. So it might not necessarily kind of all pile up together in one go, maybe. But I don't necessarily see that. Maybe on a mundane level, we're going to see more of that manifestation. But for people personally and in your life story, I feel like it's kind of just it's a more of an organic thing. You know, it's never just like taking in isolation.
Yeah. It does help when the moon reaches that point. So I will just give people a heads up for Friday night. That's when the moon is going to oppose Mars from Sagittarius, Friday the 28th. So you might get some glimmer into what that Mars energy looks, or it could just be heightened, obviously, especially in an opposition there. So if it's time to be patient and take your time and not overdo things,
yeah, definitely,
that would be a good thing on Friday night.
And Jupiter having just entered back into Pisces, creating a mutable T-square.
Yeah. So just, you know, slow your roll on Friday night, just saying. All right. Well, we are rolling forward here. My list is like I feel like words are just blurring with this Mars Neptune. I look at things and I'm like, I can't read it. It's just like, what does that even say? What does it say?
Mars would say, return to your intuition.
Yeah. Or just step through the chart. That'll get me there. So on Monday, when we have on Halloween, we got a first quarter in Aquarius at 8 degrees of Aquarius. So that lunar eclipse energy is pushing into its next phase. On the evening of Halloween there, which is interesting if you celebrate and you're out there with kids, and there's just some tension some tension in the air, some communal tension, I suppose, with the
Saturn has just stationed direct too, so we're just on the other side of the eclipse in Scorpio. Mars is stationed retrograde. Saturn is stationing direct, and it's the first time the moon's gonna hit Saturn too.
That's right. Yeah, the following on Tuesday. Yeah. So Tuesday we'll have an interesting Saturnian flavor to it. That'll be a little different than it has been in the last couple months, just because, like you said, it's, you know, Saturn's now direct. It's got a forward agenda. And it being just so close to Uranus still. So this is a heightened point. So just know November 1st does have that Saturnian flavor to it. And then we are going to move on. So a couple things are going to happen between first quarter and the lunar eclipse that are going to take place on November 8th. So we have Venus, who is going to conjunct the South Node on November 2nd. And then the Sun and Mercury are both going to conjunct the South Node around the 5th and the 6th. while Venus goes on to oppose Uranus and square Saturn. So basically we have all these, Elodie just laughs. She's like, ah, ha, ha. So
it's hitting everything in my chart. So
yeah,
I just might as well laugh it.
Yeah. Laugh now. No, but so here we have these 3 planets that are going to like hit that, you know, that Drano, that release, that south node, you know, the dreams of excrement are coming up at this time. And so, but Venus is kind of leading the charge here, right? Venus is the first one to hit the south node, and then as the other planets go over it, she is lighting up first Uranus, which can definitely give some precursors to what the eclipse is going to be that's coming, right? Because it's going to be a Venusian ruled eclipse. So she's traveling these degrees, and then she's going to hit Saturn, which is interesting now in the where Saturn and Uranus is, especially this year. It's like before all these planets would hit Saturn before it hit Uranus, but now it hits Uranus for it has the Uranian moment before it has the Saturnian moment. So any thoughts on all these planets going over the south node?
Well, like I was saying, in a bigger sense, I think it's part of the process of Venus and the Venusian matters being renewed. That's how I see it, you know, from the square to Pluto, like in the last 2 weeks of September, into all of this, the eclipses, and moving into that. You're like, Venus is being rewired, and it's kind of just, you know, because the square, she's going to be square Saturn. She's going to, you know, it's relational theme,
yes,
you know, and or financial or self-worth. I see some people, depending on where this is, that it has more to do with their own sense of self-worth, their boundaries, and all of that. But like I said, I think I see it more as a sort of, I see more the whole thing as a process, not particularly like, you know, that specific moment or whatever. It's like Venus is going down, she's disappearing, she's in the underworld, she's in the pit, she's in the vortex, like, and there's something about that, like, that's really important just for where she's going, you know.
Oh, I do like that in regards to the trajectory with it, right?
Yes,
because
the trajectory.
She reaches the south node first and has that moment to then kind of be lit up by the Uranian aspect, which can be very liberating in a sense, even if it is trying in some way. At least it's like kind of bringing some sort of like awakening energy to it. And then the whole time the moon's going to be in Pisces, that's trining this and going to be near that Neptune. So once again, that kind of spiritualization process, or moving through something that, or letting go and releasing something, you know, around November 3rd, give or take. And then kind of like the boundaries that come with maybe Saturn there, or the renegotiating relationships, or the strengthening, you know, of your own values, or talking about the self-worth component. Because all that's going on with Venus, you know, Venus releases and has that moment, spiritualization moment with the south node. And then we have the sun right there, which is our identity and our vitality and our, you know, sense of self, that is going over that. And then there's the whole perceptual process of Mercury that is going to go over that too, where Mercury gets on board with that. So it's a nice train, I think, of and like you said, it doesn't always make it easy. We might want to try to laugh through it a little bit, but it's a nice train of just like dropping kids off at the pool. No more no more shit
what? But Venus's desires, and Venus with the south node, and Mars's desire, like both Mars and Venus are the planets of desires. Mars is retrograde and rules that Venus, and Venus is with the south node. Like, you're not gonna get what you want right away. There's something about not getting what you want. That's why I was talking about like this whole kind of spiritualization process, and kind of like surrendering or letting go and having faith and all of that. Because if you're trying to actualize your desires like quickly, and Mars is going to get really impatient when it stages retrograde, it's going to be like really frustrating, and you're going to want things to happen, and you're not necessarily going to get quick result and get exactly what you want right away. That's kind of what I see here, you know?
Yeah. And so making, you know, in Venus fashion, making peace with that to some extent, like just, and that's just the way it is.
Well, Venus square Saturn is the work that's going to be required to get what you want also, you know, the commitment and the work necessary to get what you want.
Or just the realization of the delay of it.
Yeah,
you
true.
know,
Exactly.
yeah,
Because it could be a lot of time it's just like you said, it's just external circumstance. There might very well be things that transpire on a mundane level with these, you know, these aspects here that we'll have to contend with.
Yeah. So Uranus gets us all pumped up, and then Saturn's like, not yet. um which moves us forward, because that's basically the whole week there before we get to the lunar eclipse on Tuesday the 8th. So that's kind of the flavor that leads us up.
Kind of feeling stuck.
Well, yeah, you know, hopping all, you know, everybody's going over the south node, and Venus is getting electrified, but then she's like hits with like an electric fence. It like shocks her, and then she's like, oh, I can't go anywhere.
That is the perfect image for that Saturn Uranus square, an electric fence. You just figured it out. I love that.
Fence. Oh
yeah,
my god.
I love that.
Yeah. So
Very
well,
good one.
There it is. And the eclipse on the 8th is only going to exemplify that a little bit more, obviously, because the moon there in Taurus, she's like exalted in Taurus. So, you know, the moon does have a position there, but it's in a precarious place because obviously the eclipse is squaring Saturn pretty close there. And Venus is the ruler and still in a combust situation. And Mercury is going to have a cazimi that day. So that's an interesting component to it, I think. What do you think about Mercury? There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, we had the inferior cazimi on fall, on the equinox, right?
Yeah.
So now Mercury, so that was what, like the 22nd of September? Mercury was retrograde, cazimi the sun at 0 Libra. Oh, now a superior conjunction. So there's something, again, just like relational, but we're moving deeper into, because that was ruled by Venus also. Like we're still in that sort of desire relationship realm and all of that, you know, and all the logistics needed to get to what you want. So I do think the cazimi, I'm all for cazimis, because I do think they're, you know, it's again a moment of illumination. So I like the fact that Mars and Mercury are in mutual reception. Mercury sits on the royal throne. There's a moment of realization, epiphanies. Sometimes it's not as drastic as it sounds when astrologers are delineating it. It could just be kind of like a small integration process. You're just like, yeah, this makes sense. Maybe this, you know. What I want to say is that just because my moon is there in Taurus, like my natal moon, there, and kind of how I've conceptualized this is that the moon in Taurus is looking for stability, and it's looking to just root down, ground down, find sort of like a simple way of functioning, the most like simple ways. And it does not seem like it's possible. But there's the North Node eclipse. It's a full moon. A full moon is a moment of illumination. Obviously, the moon is being eclipsed, but it's a North Node. North Node is the head of the dragon. It eats, it wants more. It's kind of like a plus sign, you know. But the ruler of this eclipse is in Scorpio, in the gutter, doing what it's doing, playing with poop.
Trying to flush. She's trying to flush. It's not
flush.
It's coming back up.
Exactly. So there's something about taking risks versus safety, I find, with this angle, the Taurus Scorpio just because Uranus, the Uranian component, the full moon is conjoined with Uranus. And so there's this compulsion to take some risks to be more comfortable, or to take some risk because we have the idea that once we move towards that risk or that innovation or that upgrade, we're going to be more rooted and embodied. We're going to be more aligned with who we're supposed to be. We're going to be more, something like that.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you said about it being, I know astrologers, we can get so dramatic. Everything is like the end of the world or the next best thing. But I feel like I love the idea of it being almost a very internal realization process, right? Because it's like Mercury's in the heart of the sun, and being ruled by just retrograde stationed Mars, which is an internalized process of maybe perceiving and kind of like lining up what your agenda might be, right? Because Mars is always has an agenda, but right now it's very internalized and processing and trying to perceive which direction it's going. And like you said, Taurus is very Taurus likes simple, Taurus likes quiet, Taurus like wants to kind of like maybe meditate on it, or
things,
like or take it in, sense it. What are you sensing at that particular moment? So it does have that awakening energy, and it wants the stability of it, but maybe it's coming through the perception of what needs to change, the strategy that has to be taken, the risks that have to be taken, maybe not in that particular moment, but down the road, or just internally with like navigating your own energy and your own emotions and your own feelings in a new way, to change the story along. But it does have, it has a very internalized energy in my mind, where we want to pull back and process it a little bit more, because especially with Venus being in detriment too, exile distances in my mind from whatever it is. So we just might want that space. We might just need space and quiet in a moment within
take a breather. And Mars in Gemini retrograde, I feel like that's very anxiety inducing. I don't know for you, but in general I noticed that the Mars retrograde just exaggerates the Mars signature more. So there's like impatience, or more bickering, or more frustration, or more arguments, or more
it's an internalized thing. Like my mom has Mars retrograde in Sagittarius, and you'd think she'd be out there adventuring the world and doing, no, she doesn't go anywhere. She's got a lot of just she basically doesn't move. A lot of times she's like not even getting any exercise. And so there's just these frustrations. And I always used to wonder that before I knew anything about astrology. When I was young, I remember we'd go out to like eat at somewhere, and the thing she always wanted would never be in stock. Like they wouldn't have that. And my mom would like throw like a little mini tantrum, and she'd be like, I don't want to have anything. Or like, I don't know, because there's just like a frustration that comes up in the resistance. We're talking about resistance and the defiance and the defensiveness of Scorpio, but also Mars, right? Because I mean, that's what Mars does. And so it just has this
and things are not straightforward, like, because Mars wants just things to be straightforward, I think. So
but
things
are not
just
here.
No, it's not straightforward. It's complex. There might be two sides to the story. There might be many sides to the story. And Taurus is looking to simplify, but also I think because of the Uranian component with this full moon, it's looking to innovate, especially in that part of your chart. It's looking to kind of bring different ways of being. But the nodes, personally, I do think they work together. They're kind of like a battery. That's how I see it. And we need the 2 points for it to charge properly or work properly. So whatever's happening on the Scorpio end and the Taurus end inform each other. And, it's kind of like a holistic thing. Obviously, Uranus is throwing curveballs. Saturn is throwing curveballs. Mars retrograde is throwing curveballs to all of this process. But fundamentally, if we just take a step back and look, okay, what is happening on the Taurus Scorpio axis with this eclipse? It has to do with finding ways to be more embodied, maybe in real life, but also having to let go of a sense of security to get there, or a safety net, or, you know, take some risks. And that's really just kind of not possible. And Scorpio's just holding on, being like, I'll just kind of wait and strategize more. And maybe with all of this, if I move maybe this little piece, but there's something so fixated that, like, and the grooves are so profound that when the change happened, they're just kind of like all complete, you know. So that's a long process for the change to take place, and that's why we have to be patient.
Yeah.
But there's something very fixated here that's trying to be dislodged. Uranus is trying to dislodge things, but it's very fixated. Saturn's not making the job easy. It's just,
No, it's not.
you know, so it's
Well,
like,
but in Saturn at the same time, it's not making the job easy. Might have like the about it, but it could also be that there's like, it's actually putting something in the way that makes you have
progress.
no choice but to change. You
Yeah.
know,
True, true, true. Yeah.
like
I
you
like
have
that.
no choice at this time, and that could be external. I mean, we're talking about an air
Yes.
sign. We're talking
Yes.
big old fat squirrel just walked by. We're talking about an air sign. This is external. This is community. This could be political. I mean, there could be changes in that sphere that brings some sort of like barrier of
Yeah.
change that comes around for other people.
Responsibilities.
Responsibilities, you know, obviously we're living in a volatile financial climate
Yeah.
right now, and the
Things are
rules and
really
regulations,
expensive.
this is all part of it. I mean, there could be sticker shocks that come up with you know, we think about the lunar eclipse in Taurus conjunct Uranus, you know, I have a feeling there's going to be definitely some financial things going
Yes.
down, or how the system
Yeah.
is dealing with that, and the crunch
Digital
there.
currency.
All these types of things are
Yeah.
going to be coming up, and how we're trying to find order or strategy and navigate these like volatile situations. And that's where
Yeah.
Saturn kind of comes in too. It's like, how do I organize all these things that seem to be a runaway train? I don't I don't know.
But
But
once Saturn, I think Saturn's moving, stationing direct, like around eclipse season, just like as the sun enters Scorpio and stuff, it's like the final reckoning of that Saturn Uranus square. Once Saturn moves away from Aquarius, we're only left with Uranus next year. So
yeah.
things are really going to pop off. I think like what's been slowly, you know, kind of shaping itself on this fixed axis is really, once Saturn moves away, it's kind of the champagne cap, you know, just pops off. And
Yeah.
I think with what you were talking about, like the Aries eclipse, Jupiter and Aries and experience stuff, it's really gonna, so it's like a whole gestation process, you know,
Yeah.
a real transformational process. So on a mundane level, it means a lot of different things, but on a personal level, especially if you have fixed placement, you know, this whole gestation process is necessary because the fixed signs are really slow to change. So
Well, and I love your idea of the gestation process when I think about like Saturn ruling like the bones and the spinal cord, and like the, you
mm,
know, like we're trying, like maybe that's part of this whole gestation, is we're trying to put form into something, and it's very slow, and it takes a lot of time, it takes change, it takes different
yeah,
perceptions, it takes a risk, it
yeah.
takes innovation, it does all those things. So we're just like maybe we're starting to put some bones. But it's a very slow process, you know, like
Yeah.
we just gotta stick with it.
And you see a
So
lot of people, like on a mundane level with the eclipse in Taurus, I do think it's bringing a lot more desire in the collectivity to get off the internet, return to your senses, ground
100%.
yourself, eat natural food that are not transformed, be more self-sufficient, have a garden, all of this stuff that we've seen already because Uranus has been there, you know, for some time now.
Which I like when it comes to maybe some things coming out into the open that does support like the Earth's mission in some way, or some innovations coming out and having to do with you know, food or natural ways of being. Like, I mean, Uranus is innovation point. So, I mean, within all the tension that is happening, there could be some things that either come out, and they don't have to necessarily be public. That's the thing, is like when I was talking in the Mars retrograde episode, when I went back and looked at Mars retrograde in Gemini and the cycles there, it's like the first web page that was ever created was during Mars retrograde. The first time they ever coined the term for Microsoft is under Mars retrograde. You know,
Wow.
these are things that are underground. We don't see them when they happen.
Yeah.
So there could be these like life-changing innovations that are taking place, but we don't know about them yet.
That's
you know,
right.
because it's under wraps and it's quiet. It's in a, you know, a receiving sign. It's not quite out there yet, but it could change the face of humanity over time when it's revealed much later, or as, you know, etc.
And Mars trine Saturn too, like it happened in September and it's going to happen at the end of November.
Yeah.
So, you know, Mars retrograde is working in favor of what like the Saturnian agenda is too. It's like that, like this slow structuring process. I do like to see that Mars Saturn trine. It's constructive, I think.
I agree. And I love that it bookends the whole Neptune process.
Yeah.
Because within it, it's like, it's not complete chaos. It's not just like, there is Saturn hovers around that whole space. And so if we just get through this particular moment, there's going to be the form, there's going to be the solid idea, there's going to be some sort of flow and strategy that we can work with. We just have to get through this time. And so once again, what Elodie was saying earlier, patience, just have the patience.
And in our research that I've been doing with the lunar zodiac or the lunar mention, we noticed that the Saturn section associated with like the 18 degrees and just before a little bit, I can't remember the number, which number, I don't have it on hand here, but that particular lunar mention is associated with quarreling and stagnation, but the lunar mention that comes after is really associated with epiphanies and flow. So like exactly what you're describing there, I do think that like all of this containment and this quarreling or this stagnation or this immobility and this inability to really move forward eventually leads to this like this flow, this release, blood flow.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. All right. Well, we're going to ride that wave and see where that takes us. So after the lunar eclipse, it's an interesting week because we have that eclipse, and then Mercury is riding with the sun there. Mercury is moving incredibly fast within all this. And then they go on to, obviously they're making oppositions with Uranus during the eclipse, but on the following days through the 9th through the 11th, we have Saturn tension taking place because, I mean, the sun and Mercury are both going to square Saturn that midweek. So we're just prepare for some Saturn moments that midweek, or you just being more aware of what that Saturn energy is and how to work with it. But really what's going to happen is Mercury is going to be on the coattails of Venus because Mercury is moving pretty fast here. And so we have this train of Venus does something, Mercury does something, and the sun does something. And that train is basically trine to Neptune, a sextile to Pluto, and then a trine to Jupiter. So basically from the 10th to the 17th, so Thursday to Thursday, we have this trine to Neptune, sextile to Pluto, and trine to Jupiter, which the trines to Jupiters are very intriguing. I mean, the Neptune one obviously is because Mars is square Neptune. So we're getting a different flavor of Neptune through the Scorpio lens and the trines. But also all these planets coming to trine Jupiter back in Pisces seems very intriguing to me. So any thoughts on kind of that movement taking place?
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I had noted that, but well, one thing is, okay, we're out of the eclipse sort of thing. So I always see the eclipses as a sort of installment, you know? So even though it's like all Scorpio season and the sun is still in Scorpio, like whatever transpires at the end of October until that full moon eclipse, that's kind of like a parenthesis. And then after that, we're kind of more Yeah, that's just my way of conceptualizing that. So I do like Mercury and Venus together. I feel like Mercury is doing some kind of job there. It's doing the job for Mars, and it's kind of like, reaching to Venus. Um, it's interesting because it's a little bit like what's happening right now in the first half of September with all of these trines. But instead of being the conceptual, it's more the emotional or maybe the more
Mm,
felt.
hmm.
Because when we see supportive aspect and planets communicating like this, that that modality is lit up. And right now we have the air modality lit up. Lots of conversation, lots of, blah, 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 lots of strategizing, conceptualizing. So because of the amount of water, I wonder if it's not going to be more like, yeah, like water modality, which is not just emotion. Like we simplify often. We always say like, water is emotion, but it's more like the felt, how things feel, I think.
Yeah, how things feel, what we're picking up with our intuitive selves, our imaginary self, that imaginary self that you're always talking to. That's yeah, it is a very feeling based way of being. It's a spiritualized way of being, because that's what essentially what feeling is, in my mind. I mean, I feel like this would be a great time for either meditation or
Yeah.
for engaging with your creative self, whether that's creativity just to create, or you're inspired by the muse, or you're doing creative acts to go through some cathartic experience too. Maybe you got dealt a hand that you're like, how do I release this? Well, the creative impulse could be really abundant, I think, during this time period.
Yeah, Mercury Venus together is like still again, it's like thinking about beauty, thinking about our values, thinking about what we desire, thinking about what we want. Like the process continues, but it's like in Scorpio, it's kind of just like more yeah, it's more of an intuitive. It's not like so rational.
Well, I feel like there's also like a nice little, like, seeing the beauty within what is not typically beautiful, or like might be a little ugly, or a little I mean, I use whatever that means, the ugly, but like might be taboo, or like the silver lining. The silver lining to me is very Mercury, Venus, and Scorpio, because yeah, maybe something not that savory we have taken in, but how do we see the beauty in that? How do we see the promise in that? How do we see how it could actually be advantageous in some way?
I
And
love
kind of
that.
making peace with that.
It's Venus and Scorpio too. Is that why you're saying that?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's not all pretty. It's not all like roses and a bright blue sky. It's it can be a little dark in there. It can be a little
Yeah, it's definitely like, I don't know, when I see Venus, like all these planets in Scorpio trining Jupiter, Neptune, and Mars square Neptune, it's kind of like, it reminds me of just kind of like a teenage movie, like people, it's like Halloween season or like fall, and they go into a cemetery and it's kind of goth and they smoke weed and they just lay down and they have like existential conversations or something. Um, just kind of like wandering the cemetery or something. It's like yeah, it's very experiential as opposed to productive. I guess that's what I would say. I'd
yeah.
say it doesn't look so productive. Like whatever kind of transpires from the eclipse cycle, we move into this kind of maybe unproductive
Yeah.
um,
Yes.
realm where we just kind of need to tune out a little bit and just kind of be in different modalities, like with our desire in our bodies, and I don't know, something like that.
I think you're
Music.
absolutely right, because I mean, I don't know about you, but the mode I'm in right now, I feel like I'm like juggling 20 balls at one time,
Oh
and
my
and
god.
I'm exhausted. Like,
Yeah.
and so I feel like this is actually some sort of like break, where it's like, you know what, you can just hang out for a little bit, you can process, you can move at a slower pace, and it's okay. And through that, like, kind of quieting down and having that moment to just be and there's actually something that's facilitating your growth and your
Yeah.
spiritual growth, and like the emotional baggage, like releasing the emotional
Yeah.
baggage I was talking about earlier. Cause you know, this period ends with all these trines to Jupiter.
Mm.
And I think that I think we need that in order to like have move forward, you know, inside. We just might need a moment to go with the flow of life.
Yeah, the worst signature, like the worst possible kind of scenario with these signature is kind of like escapism, self-destruction,
Yeah.
Scorpio, wanting to just like drink or get high or whatever, because that's Neptune also. That's kind of like the worst that I would see. When I did a research on Jupiter and Pisces people, like a lot of them were like escape artists,
Mm.
not escape artists, how do you say, like escapism, like Edith Piaf. A lot of people were like drinkers and gamblers and stuff like that, because Jupiter and Pisces kind of like, it's looking for that real kind of, it's looking for that sensation, especially close to Neptune like that. So I do think on a productive level, I guess productive, I don't like using that word, but it's very creative, like movies, good time to like, like, film a short, or like you said, meditation retreat and things like that. On the other side of it, it's kind of wanting to ignore everything maybe, and
Yeah.
um
Pretend it's not
or
there.
or engage in kind of like activities that allows you to not think about things, but in a kind of self-destructive way, because the Scorpio signature. But this is just, just I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Well, and with anything,
facets.
you know, there's and once again, all this is backed, all the Scorpio is backed by this Mars retrograde in Gemini. So there's possibilities for all these different storylines to be taking place.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
simultaneously, it doesn't even have to be one for one person, one for the other. It could be
Yeah.
we're all dancing in this space. I will say just on November 11th, as this is all taking place, that's when we're going to have the moon conjunct that Mars retrograde for the first time. So, on that Friday, very
And
early in
Sun
the
square
morning,
Saturn.
and the sun square Sat. So there's a there's definitely, if you want to get the flavor of what Mars retrograde in Gemini is, I feel like the moon is going to really pick up, especially just Gemini while the moon's in Gemini during that
Yeah.
cycle anyways, after the eclipse. So
Mm.
just kind of pay attention if you're a moon tracker like I am.
And
So yeah,
again, like, it's like, again, I think it's kind of like depending on where things hit in your chart is going to play out very differently for people.
yeah. Yeah, there's like these hot spots. It's like, are you a fixed
Yeah.
person that's in the middle of the fixed sign? Or are you a fixed person that's in the early part of the fixed sign with the solar eclipse? Are you a late degree mutable person that is getting this Mars Neptune,
Yeah.
activity? Like there's these specialized hot points. I wouldn't say that the cardinal folks are completely out of it, but it is definitely a little more heavy on the fixed and the mutable
Yeah.
zone right now. So just see where that lies for you. Um, it's interesting too, because as we were just talking about Venus, Mercury, and the sun making this flow to Neptune, Pluto, and Jupiter. Within that, we have a last quarter moon in Leo, which is always a very personalized get in touch with yourself process, I think, personally. And that's going to be on the Wednesday, the 16th. So that's another kind of chapter turn page in this lunation cycle that is taking place. What else do we have going on there? And obviously this is actually leading us to the square with Neptune. Mars's next square with Neptune. So the second pass is going to be on the 19th. And so just as all those planets, so basically Venus and Mercury both move into Sagittarius. So that will be a whole different flavor. You know, Venus moves in on the 16th, around the 16th, 15th, 16th, and then Mercury on the 17th. So that's going to take some pressure off the Scorpio energy there. But which is interesting because the next pass of Mars square Neptune is now backed by Mercury in Sagittarius, which is a bit of a different flavor. Right as the sun trines Jupiter. So it's to me, this is an interesting moment from about the 17th. Well, I'd say maybe the 18th, because the moon is going to light up that configuration. The 18th through the 20th, that weekend. So I guess, and this kind of brings us pretty much almost to the end of Scorpio season here, but let's talk about that the second Mars square to Neptune and being backed by that Mercury and Sag.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. So when we were talking about the trine between like Venus, Mercury, and Jupiter earlier, just then, I hadn't noticed that the sun was square Saturn. I wonder if there's going to be more, more creative flow coming through with these aspects here, just because of the Sag influx.
Yeah.
And like,
I feel like it opens things. Like there's, what was once really closed now seems to be like, oh, but there's possibility, right? You know, because Mercury and Venus are now looking to Jupiter, the sun's trining Jupiter, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe there is a way forward, or maybe
and like Scorpio can be kind of like also very intense, right? As we know.
What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about.
It can be all or nothing. I think it could be more all or nothing vibes than as we move and progress to the month of November, it becomes a little bit more integrated. Although, Mars is there agitating things, and it will continue because Mars is squaring Neptune. So this, if anything, it might be just kind of like going back into this lack of focus or this scattering that we're kind of experiencing a little bit right now, with the Mars square Neptune that just happened. I wonder, because Mercury in Sag is a little bit impatient also. And Mars is like now moving retrograde and stuff. So it's almost like kind of being like, oh, I can make that work. Yeah, that's going to work. Let's just take a shot, or something like kind of like more risk taking.
There is a stretch here, right? Because the sun trining Jupiter too, being like, like yes. Say yes to that. Yeah, let's do it.
Say yes to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Say yes to that, and yes to that, and yes to that. And you're like, wait, how did my plate get so full again? I don't know how that happened.
And the crazy thing is that we have a moon in Sag, a new moon in Sag, like later on the 23rd, and you're probably going to talk about that later in another podcast, but Jupiter stations direct on the new moon in Sagittarius.
Yes.
So something is kind of kickstarting here, but again, there might be a lot of kind of fantasy involved or whatever, or we're going to be faced with our impatience and the impatience that Mars retrograde brings as we progress to the Sag season. It's going to be less emo, less churning, less like processing venom, less like unclogging toilet, and more just kind of like you're going to have to tie your horses, and they're wild horses or something,
Yeah. Well, I feel like this is going to be a welcome change, even though it's still going to be a little chaotic and
definitely. I love the mutable energy.
Yeah.
But looking at Jupiter, Jupiter ruling the Sag season, Jupiter in Pisces, and Mars square Neptune, there's a little bit of like Sagittarius is the salesman of the zodiac. There's a little bit of like, we can make this work. And it's true, like Sagittarius make crazy thing happen. So it's like, if you don't take a risk, if you don't do it, it's not gonna work, or you're never gonna find out, so there's like this kind of more gambling kind of like thing that kind of comes in.
Yeah, well, because it's there's more of an optimistic flair where everything was so intense and extreme in Scorpio, and it was like, oh, like just going through just going through it. You know,
Yeah.
we begin in a Sag and we're, you know, Venus becomes more open, Mercury's becoming more open. Maybe it's not seeing things
Yeah.
clearly. Maybe it's only looking at the bigger picture and not the details. You know, Mercury is in its detriment there. But, you know, sometimes we have to have that. Sometimes we have to have that optimistic way of looking. And so it just seems like the skies are a little brighter. Are things necessarily much better? I don't know. But
Yeah.
it's like the
It's not so
attitude.
heavy.
It's
It's
not
not
so
so
heavy.
goth.
No, it's not so goth. It's like, you know, you start to add a little color to your wardrobe, you know, maybe you put on some
Yes.
red shoes, maybe you put on a
Yeah.
yellow shirt, you know, it's not, maybe you take off the eyeliner because, you know, maybe it's like, it's getting a little too heavy there. So yeah, it's just these slight like lightening up, right? You know, and then by the time we get
Yeah.
to Sag season, obviously, and it's interesting because Mercury and Venus are going to conjunct, I believe, right before, yeah, the last day of Scorpio season. We have a Venus Mercury conjunction in Sagittarius. So right as we leave, you know, Scorpio, there's kind of big Sag energy that's taking place
And
at
the
this
sun
time.
square Jupiter.
And
Oh no,
and
sorry. I put was it the sun in Scorpio trine Jupiter?
yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes. Yeah.
So there is this whole Sag exit that seems to happen. There's a mutable exit that happens with the sun leaving that fixed sign. And you know, granted, it's going to be a Scorpio sun, a Scorpio moon, like it's going to be internalized in some sense. You know, we're at the darkest balsamic point of the lunar cycle. But there's something about what's cooking up behind the scenes with that Venus and Mercury and the Jupiter.
The question is like, can you keep your poker face during the eclipse season?
Well, maybe with the Scorpio you still can, because it's
That's
like,
true. Yeah.
no, you don't know. We were still talking about the secrets, right? You know,
Yeah, definitely. I know. Yeah.
What's going on behind the scenes.
So the moral of the stories is between October 20th to November 20th, we're looking at the bumpy terrain, and then a sort of like, you know, we're looking at having to work a little bit on ourselves. Let's just put it that way. Oh, yeah. And then moving into Sag season, there's definitely this sort of moving forward.
Just moving forward. We're lightening up, seeing the bigger picture of it all, you know.
And Saturn's moving forward, which we like.
Yeah, we're not stuck here. We're not stuck here forever. There's a glimmer of hope we can attach to once again.
And then Mars retrograde does not rule the show anymore as much. It's still happening, but it's not ruling the sun and, you know, all the Scorpio planets. So yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. So there it is. There's a lot going on. And of course, I'm going to challenge you with during a Mars stationing retrograde of if you had one word to describe the Scorpio eclipse season, what would it be?
Well, in your little notes of your show, I had put 2 keywords.
Of course, well, you know,
Mars is in
Mars
Gemini.
and Gemini.
I put opportunities for renewal, because obviously, or self-deception also. That's the 2 keywords that I put.
Renewal versus deception.
Well, just because of the Neptunian signature with Mars there, it's kind of like, yeah.
Well, I'll let you have it, since it is mutable space. I think you're.
What's your
right.
keyword?
I think maybe mine is depths.
Depths.
Depths. Go, like, basically engage with the depths, because I think there's a lot to be found there. If you just, like, it can be tempting to stay on the surface, especially with Gemini, but so much is being asked of us from the depths. And so it's almost Venus, like, don't skirt that, go there, because it'll be worth it and you'll gain understanding and
Yeah.
perception afterwards.
Yeah. What do you really want? You know,
Yeah.
Venus. Well, I mean, Scorpio is also that, it's desires, and Venus disappearing is kind of like, what do you really want?
I guess we're going to find out. I know. Insert witch laugh.
Yeah.
Stir the brew. That's where we're at. That's where we're at.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. It was a pleasure getting to chat with you.
Absolutely. So where can people find you? What do you got going on?
Okay, so you can find me at ninthhouseastrology.com. This is my website. I'm on Instagram, but I have a private profile now because everybody was just scamming my account, so I decided to make it private, but I do take people in after a little Scorpio scam. It's Ninth House Astrology on Instagram, and I also have a website in collaboration with my colleague lunarzodiac.com, where we research the lunar mansion. And yeah, I consult and write horoscopes for astrographs, so my monthly horoscope are on the astrograph website also.
Love it. So there's a lot to engage with Elodie. So go on and visit her on her website or on the gram. You do share some lovely insights, I have to say. When I see them pop up, I'm always like, oh yeah, I resonate with that.
Yeah.
So in case you didn't get that, of course, I always do a blog post for each guest that joins me on the podcast. So you can come on over to energeticprinciples.com and there will be a post with all the information from this show here. You can also visit me on Instagram at Energetic Principles, where I have been sparsely posting. I keep saying that, but that is just where I am at this particular time in my life. And I'm going to be on vacation for half of this Scorpio cycle. So just so you know, if you don't see me anywhere, I'm living it up somewhere else now. But yeah, no, it'll be nice. It's a good time coming. I'm going to be in New Orleans during Halloween.
Oh, that's amazing.
Like,
enjoy. I might join you.
Yeah, come on down. Hopefully I'll come back alive. But I'm sure I will. I can't kill this Scorpio rising. Not yet. All right. So what else do I have going on? Well, you can sign up for my monthly newsletter as well, the Heavenly Wind. I may or may not have a October edition, November edition. Depends. It could come out a little late just because I'm going to be on vacation and I'm not always a good planner. So I'm just going to own that. And say it may or may not come this month. Other than that, I'm cooking some things up behind the scenes, but can't tell you about them yet. Secrets. Sneaky Mal is up to something. You're gonna have to wait. All right. Well, what else? You can if you listen to this in a place that you can review it, leave a review on iTunes, not even iTunes anymore, Apple Podcasts, or wherever. I don't know. If you feel like reviewing it, review it. It does help things be seen. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment. Tell us what you think about the season. It just helps the boost. And I like to hear from you because I'm curious what's going on in your life. Share it with a friend, spread the good word, email it over, text it, Instagram it, share it, however you feel called, because people need to know what's going on now. Knowledge is power. And really, that is it. I want to thank you again, Elodie, for being on my show. It was a pleasure getting to connect with you and talk all things Scorpio season.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Well, we wish you the best out there. Take your time. Take your time. Do it right. I don't know. It's a groove thing. I don't know why that just came to me. But there you have it. So good luck, everyone out there. And as always, may the stars be with you.